The conference room smelled like recycled air and tension. Ben Wright sat at the long metal table with Holly on his lap and whiskers curling around his feet. Across from him, a dozen alien delegates stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disgust. The insect-like creature named Quiln clicked his mandibles together in what Ben assumed was disapproval. "You misunderstand the challenge," Quiln said through his translator device. "We asked each species to bring their apex predator, the creature at the top of your food chain, your most dangerous hunter." Ben shifted Holly to his other knee. She was playing with a small toy ship, making soft whooshing sounds. "I understood perfectly," he said. The reptilian commander called Brog slammed a scaled fist on the table. "This is mockery. You bring a larva and a small fur creature to face the spine render? My people's greatest warrior beast stands 3 meters tall and has armor that deflects plasma fire." "Sounds impressive," Ben said mildly. Whiskers yawned, showing all his teeth. A crystalline being that shimmered like living glass spoke next, its voice like wind chimes. "Perhaps humans simply have no apex predators. Their world must be very safe." Ben almost laughed at that. Earth safe? The planet that invented hurricanes, earthquakes, and wildlife, that ranged from tiny mosquitoes carrying deadly diseases to massive predators in every environment. But he kept quiet. Let them think what they wanted. Quiln stood up, his 6 legs moving in perfect coordination. "The challenge will proceed. Each species has submitted their predator. All will be released into the habitat simultaneously. You must survive alongside them for 72 hours. The habitat includes forest, water, caves, and open terrain. There are shelters, but they are not guaranteed safe zones." "When do we start?" Ben asked. "Immediately." Quiln gestured to a door that slid open. "Your entry point is through there." Ben stood up, settling Holly against his hip. She wrapped her small arms around his neck. Whiskers stretched, then followed at his heels, tail high and confident. The other delegates watched them leave, already whispering among themselves about how quickly the humans would die. The habitat was larger than Ben expected. When the entry door sealed behind them, he found himself standing at the edge of a dense forest. Artificial sunlight streamed through the canopy above. In the distance, he could hear water running and the rustle of leaves in a manufactured breeze. Somewhere far off, something roared. Something big. "Pretty trees, Daddy," Holly said, pointing at the tall structures around them. "Very pretty, sweetheart." Ben scanned the area, his wilderness guide training kicking in. Water source was priority 1. Shelter was priority 2. Understanding what else was in here with them was priority 3. He spotted a stream about 50 meters away and headed toward it. Whiskers trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to sniff the air and listen. Ben trusted the cat's senses more than his own in unfamiliar territory. If Whiskers was calm, there was no immediate danger. They reached the stream and Ben knelt down, testing the water. Clean, cold, probably filtered and safe. He let Holly splash her hands in it, while he looked for a good spot to set up a basic camp. A cluster of large rocks near the water's edge would provide some shelter and a good vantage point. "Let's make camp here, Holly Bear." "Okay, Daddy." She was already collecting pretty pebbles from the stream bed. Ben spread out a simple tarp from his pack, set up a small camp stove, and arranged their supplies. It was basic gear, nothing fancy. He had brought food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and some tools. Also a few of Holly's favorite snacks and Mr. Hoppy, her stuffed rabbit. The observers were watching from cameras hidden throughout the habitat. Ben knew they expected panic, weapons, defensive positions. Instead, they got a dad making lunch while his toddler played and his cat groomed himself on a sunny rock. Hours passed peacefully. Ben taught Holly the names of different plants they could see, even though these were alien plants he was making up names for. She giggled when he called one a silly purple mushroom tree. Whiskers caught a small robotic creature that scurried by, probably meant to be prey fauna. The cat batted it around for a while before losing interest. As evening approached, Ben started preparing dinner. He had brought dehydrated camping meals, easy to make and surprisingly tasty. He was heating water when Whiskers suddenly went still, ears forward, staring into the forest. Ben followed the cat's gaze. The trees were shaking. Something massive was moving through them, pushing aside branches as thick as Ben's leg. The ground trembled with heavy footsteps. "Holly, come here, please," Ben said quietly. She came immediately, sensing the change in his tone. He picked her up and stepped in front of the rocks, putting himself between his daughter and whatever was coming. The spine render emerged from the tree line. It was exactly as Brog had described. 3 meters of armored reptilian muscle, with rows of bone spikes along its spine and razor-sharp claws on each foot. Its eyes were cold and calculating. Its mouth held teeth designed for tearing meat. This was a creature built by evolution to kill. It saw them immediately. Its head swung toward their camp, nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. Ben felt Holly's arms tighten around his neck. The spine render took a step forward, then another. Whiskers, still sitting on his rock, turned to look at the approaching predator. The cat's expression didn't change. He just stared, unblinking, tail tip twitching once. The spine render slowed. Its head tilted slightly, confused. Holly peeked over Ben's shoulder.
"Daddy, big lizard,"
she said with delight, not fear. Ben took a slow breath. In his years as a wilderness guide, he had learned that predators hunted prey. Prey ran or showed fear or acted like food. The trick was not acting like food. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "Just stay calm." The spine render moved closer, now just 10 meters away. Ben could smell it, a mix of reptile musk and something sharper. He slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried meat from their supplies. Not much, but maybe enough. He tossed it gently toward the creature. The spine render's eyes followed the arc of the meat. It landed halfway between them. The creature looked at the meat, then at Ben, then back at the meat. Slowly it moved forward and sniffed the offering. After a moment it ate the meat in one bite. Then the spine render looked at Ben again, but something in its posture had changed. The aggressive hunting stance had relaxed slightly. It made a low rumbling sound, almost questioning. "That's all I've got for now, friend," Ben said. "But if you come back tomorrow, maybe I'll have more." The creature stared at him for another long moment. Then, inexplicably, it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Dawn light filtered through the artificial sky in shades of pink and orange. Ben woke to the sound of Holly humming softly, and Whiskers purring against his side. They had made it through the first night without incident, though Ben had slept lightly, waking at every sound. Now morning had come, and he could hear movement in the forest around them. He sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Holly, and checked their surroundings. The stream still bubbled nearby. Their camp was untouched. Everything seemed peaceful, but Ben knew better than to assume safety in an environment full of apex predators. "Morning, Daddy," Holly said, rubbing her eyes. "Can we have pancakes?" "How about oatmeal instead?" Ben pulled out their breakfast supplies. He didn't have a griddle, and explaining that to a 3-year-old would take more energy than he had. "Okay." Holly was easily pleased. She climbed off the tarp and immediately started looking for new pebbles to add to her collection. Whiskers stretched, arching his back, then jumped down from the rocks to patrol the perimeter of their camp. The cat moved with purpose, marking certain spots and sniffing others. Ben watched him carefully. Whiskers had better instincts than any early warning system. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. Ben was teaching Holly to count her pebbles when Whiskers suddenly froze, staring at the sky. Ben looked up. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed them, small dark shapes moving in formation high above the trees. They were descending, and as they got closer, Ben could make out details. Insect-like creatures, each about the size of his hand, with translucent wings and long needle-like appendages. They moved together like a living cloud, the hive swarms. Quiln species had sent their hunters. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They flew in perfect coordination, banking and turning as one organism. As they got closer, Ben could see the sharp points on their legs, probably venomous. A swarm like that could overwhelm a person in seconds, delivering paralytic toxins until their prey couldn't move. "Holly, stay close to me," Ben said, pulling her gently back toward the rocks. "Pretty bugs," she said, pointing up at them. The swarm circled overhead, clearly aware of the humans below. They were assessing, calculating. Ben could almost see them processing information about this new prey. He stayed still, keeping Holly behind him, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Whiskers, however, had different ideas. The cat sat at the edge of their camp, tail swishing slowly, watching the swarm with intense focus. His pupils were wide and black, tracking individual insects as they moved. One scout broke away from the main swarm, descending to investigate the camp more closely. It flew in a spiral pattern, getting lower with each pass. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet. Ben tensed, ready to grab Holly and dive for cover. The scout came within 10 feet, whiskers coiled like a spring. The insect flew closer, 8 feet, 6 feet. Whiskers launched himself into the air with impossible precision. His paw shot out, claws extended, and snagged the scout mid-flight. He landed gracefully, the insect pinned under one paw. It buzzed frantically, trying to escape. Whiskers looked up at the swarm with a casual expression that clearly said, "This is what happens if you come closer." The swarm hesitated. The buzzing sound changed pitch, becoming more agitated. They circled tighter, clearly communicating among themselves. Ben could imagine their confusion. Prey wasn't supposed to fight back with such casual confidence. Prey wasn't supposed to catch their scouts out of the air. After a long moment, the swarm began to climb, gaining altitude. They didn't leave entirely, but they moved to a safer distance, hovering high above the trees where they could observe without risk. Whiskers released the scout, which flew away in a jerky, erratic pattern back to its swarm. The cat sat down and began washing his paw, completely unconcerned. Holly clapped her hands. "Good kitty." Ben let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. In the observation room above the habitat, he imagined Quiln was having a very confusing morning. The day progressed with surprising calm. Ben took Holly, exploring along the stream, showing her different types of rocks and letting her splash in the shallow water. Whiskers followed at a distance, always alert. The hive swarm continued to observe from above, maintaining their safe distance. Around midday, they heard heavy footsteps again. The spine render emerged from the forest, moving more cautiously than before. It approached the camp slowly, almost hesitantly. Ben watched it come. The creature stopped at the same spot where it had been yesterday, about 10 meters from their camp. It sat down, which was startling. The massive predator lowered itself to the ground and simply waited. "It's the big lizard again," Holly said excitedly. Ben studied the creature. It wasn't showing any signs of aggression. If anything, it looked expectant. Then Ben noticed the wounds, fresh cuts along its side where the armored plates didn't quite meet. Something had attacked it. "Stay here with Whiskers," Ben told Holly. He grabbed his first aid kit and slowly walked toward the spine render. The creature watched him approach but didn't move. Up close, Ben could see the wounds more clearly. They were clean cuts, almost surgical. The crystalline constructs, probably. He had seen them briefly yesterday evening. Geometric shapes that phased through solid matter and fed on energy. "You got into a fight, huh?" Ben said softly. He opened the first aid kit and pulled out antiseptic and bandages. "Let's see if we can help." The spine render rumbled low in its chest, but it didn't attack. Ben took that as permission. He carefully cleaned the wounds, working gently around the armored plates. The creature flinched once but held still. "You're tougher than you look," Ben said. "These should heal fine if we keep them clean." He applied bandages where he could, though the creature's hide made it difficult. When he finished, he stepped back. The spine render stood up, shook itself, and made a sound that might have been gratitude. Then, instead of leaving, it walked over to Ben's camp and settled down near the rocks. It was staying. Ben returned to Holly, who was showing Whiskers her newest pebble collection. The cat tolerated her attention with patient dignity. "Daddy, can the big lizard stay?" Holly asked. "Looks like it wants to," Ben said. In the observation room, Brog was shouting at the screens. "That is not how a spine render behaves. They are solitary hunters. They do not seek companionship." Quiln watched silently, mandibles working thoughtfully. The human hadn't dominated the predator or shown superior strength. He had simply helped it when it was injured. And now the apex predator of Brog's people was behaving like a loyal guard animal. As evening approached, Ben prepared dinner again. He made extra, knowing they now had a guest. The spine render accepted the food offering, eating carefully. Afterward, it positioned itself at the edge of camp, facing the forest, clearly standing watch. The hive swarm descended as darkness fell, but they didn't attack. Instead, they settled in the trees around the camp, maintaining their observation. Ben could see their faint bioluminescence glowing in the branches. Holly yawned, cuddling Mr. Hoppy. "Daddy, I like it here. The big lizard is nice, and the pretty bugs are watching us." "They are, aren't they?" Ben wrapped her in a blanket. Whiskers curled up beside her, purring his deep rumbling purr. The spine render shifted position, its eyes reflecting the firelight. The hive swarm hummed softly in the trees. And Ben Wright, sitting in the middle of an alien habitat designed to test human survival against apex predators, realized something important. They weren't surviving despite the predators. They were surviving with them. Thunder rolled across the false sky, deep and menacing. Ben had been watching the weather change for the past hour, seeing dark clouds gather where there had been clear blue. This wasn't natural weather patterns. This was the habitat's control system preparing something, and he had a feeling he knew what. The final test had begun. Holly was helping the spine render by placing pebbles in a neat line along its tail. The massive creature tolerated this with surprising patience, occasionally rumbling in what sounded like contentment. Whiskers supervised from his favorite rock, while the hive swarm had grown bolder overnight, now perching in trees just 20 feet from camp. Ben checked his supplies. 3 days into the challenge, they were doing fine on food and water, but if the habitat controllers were introducing a weather event, their current camp position would be problematic. They were too close to the stream, which meant flooding was a real possibility. The first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold. "Holly, we need to pack up," Ben said, keeping his voice calm. "We're going to move to higher ground." "But Daddy, I'm playing with the lizard." "I know, sweetheart. We'll play more later. Right now we need to move." He started gathering their supplies quickly, rolling up the tarp and stuffing items into his pack. The rain intensified rapidly, going from scattered drops to a downpour in less than a minute. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by thunder. This wasn't a gentle storm. This was the habitat throwing everything it had at them. The stream was already rising, water flowing faster and higher up the banks. Ben picked up Holly, securing her against his chest with one arm while shouldering his pack with the other. Whiskers jumped to his shoulder, digging claws into his jacket to hold on. "Come on," Ben shouted over the storm to the spine render. The creature looked at him, then at the rising water, and quickly got to its feet. The hive swarm launched into the air, fighting against the wind and rain. Ben ran toward higher ground, remembering rocky outcrops he had seen to the north. The spine render loped alongside him, its powerful legs eating up the distance. Above, the hive swarm struggled to keep up, their small bodies buffeted by the wind. The ground was getting muddy, making footing treacherous. Lightning struck a tree nearby, splitting it with a crack that made Holly scream and bury her face in Ben's chest. He kept running, pushing through the storm. They reached the rocky area as the rain became torrential. Ben searched desperately for shelter and spotted a cave opening, partially hidden behind a boulder. It wasn't large, but it might be enough. In here, he ducked into the entrance, immediately checking for existing occupants. The cave was empty, extending back about 20 feet into solid rock. Not spacious, but dry. The spine render tried to follow, but its bulk wouldn't fit through the entrance. It made a distressed sound, clawing at the opening. Wait. Ben set Holly down and examined the entrance. There was another opening 10 feet to the left, larger but partially blocked by fallen rocks. He and the spine render together pushed the rocks aside, creating just enough space for the creature to squeeze through. The hive swarm flew in immediately after, their wings too wet to fly properly. They clung to the cave walls, buzzing in distress. Whiskers shook himself violently, spraying water, then began grooming with dignity. Outside, the storm raged harder. Water rushed past the cave entrance as the stream overflowed its banks. Lightning turned the world white every few seconds. The temperature dropped sharply enough that Ben could see his breath. Inside the cave, an apex predator from a warrior species pressed against one wall. A swarm of venomous hunters clustered on the ceiling. A house cat sat grooming itself, and a human father held his shivering daughter. This was the scenario the habitat controllers had engineered. Put all the predators in a confined space under stress. Watch them tear each other apart. Prove that humans couldn't maintain peace when survival was at stake. Holly was crying softly, frightened by the thunder. Ben held her close, wrapping his jacket around her. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're safe in here. I'm cold, Daddy." "I know. Me too." Ben rubbed her arms, trying to generate warmth. The spine render rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the cave floor. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, watching the humans. The hive swarm buzzed, a sound that set Ben's teeth on edge. This was the moment. The pressure point. Would they attack? Whiskers, apparently unconcerned with the tension, curled up against Holly's side and began to purr. The sound was surprisingly loud in the enclosed space, a steady rhythmic vibration that echoed off the stone walls. The spine render's head tilted, listening to the purr. Its rumbling quieted. The hive swarm's buzzing changed pitch, becoming less agitated. There was something about that steady, calm sound that cut through the stress. Holly's crying slowed, then stopped. She sniffled once, then relaxed against Ben, her small hand reaching out to rest on Whisker's back. The purring continued, steady as a heartbeat. Time passed. The storm outside grew worse, wind howling through the cave entrance. Water levels rose until they could see the flood rushing past, carrying debris. The temperature continued to drop. This was beyond a simple rainstorm. This was a full disaster scenario. The spine render moved and Ben tensed. But the creature simply positioned itself at the cave entrance, its armored bulk blocking the wind and spray from reaching deeper into the cave. It was shielding them. The hive swarm shifted, clustering together for warmth. A few of the scouts flew down from the ceiling and landed near Holly, drawn to her warmth. Ben watched carefully, ready to intervene, but the insects just settled on the ground nearby, their wings still. Hours passed. Holly fell asleep against Ben's chest, exhausted by fear and cold. Whisker's purring never stopped, a constant reassurance in the darkness. The spine render stood guard at the entrance, unmoving despite the storm battering against its armor. The hive swarm remained quiet, conserving energy. Ben stayed awake, his mind working through the implications. Every species in this cave was designed by evolution to kill. The spine render could tear him apart in seconds. The hive swarm could inject enough venom to paralyze an elephant. Even Whiskers, sweet domestic Whiskers, had claws and teeth that could do damage, but none of them were attacking. They were surviving together. Outside, crystalline constructs appeared, their geometric forms phasing through the rain. They drifted past the cave entrance, drawn by the energy signatures inside. One tried to enter, its sharp edges glinting. The spine render snapped at it, forcing it back. The construct circled for a while, then moved on, finding nothing they could easily feed on. In the observation room, Quiln stood before the monitors in silence. Around him, other council members watched the impossible scene. A human child sleeping peacefully while surrounded by apex predators. A domestic cat whose purr had somehow calmed natural killers. A father who showed no fear, only determination to protect his offspring. "This should not be possible," someone said. "And yet it is," Quiln replied softly. The storm finally began to ease as false dawn approached. The rain slowed to a drizzle, then stopped. The wind died down. Water levels started to recede. Through the cave entrance, they could see devastation. Trees down, the landscape transformed by flooding. Their original camp was completely underwater, but in the cave, everyone was alive. The spine render stepped aside, allowing light to enter. The hive swarm began to stir, wings drying. Whiskers stopped purring and started grooming again, preparing for the day ahead. Holly woke up, blinking sleepily. "Is the storm over, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. We're okay. Everyone's okay." She looked around the cave, seeing the spine render, the hive swarm, and Whiskers all nearby. "We all stayed together," she said with simple satisfaction. "We did," Ben agreed. And outside, watching through cameras, the Galactic Council had to acknowledge a truth they had never considered. Humans didn't survive by being the strongest or the fastest or the most deadly. They survived by making allies out of enemies, by building community in chaos, by extending protection to anyone who needed it, even apex predators. The morning after the storm brought clarity and consequences. Ben carried Holly outside the cave, stepping carefully over muddy ground and scattered debris. Their original camp was completely destroyed, swept away by the flood. Everything except what he had managed to grab was gone. They were starting over with minimal supplies. The spine render emerged behind them, shaking water from its armored hide. The creature had stayed at the cave entrance all night, standing guard even when exhaustion must have been overwhelming. Now it stretched, joints popping before settling down in a patch of weak sunlight to warm itself. The hive swarm flew out next, circling once before spreading out in a search pattern. Ben watched them go, curious about their behavior. They seemed to be scouting, looking for something. Food, probably. The storm would have disrupted their normal hunting patterns. Whiskers jumped from Ben's shoulder and immediately began investigating the changed landscape. The cat picked his way through puddles with obvious distaste, shaking each paw after every step. "What do we do now, Daddy?" Holly asked. She was holding Mr. Hoppy tightly, the stuffed rabbit somehow having survived the night. "We make a new camp," Ben said. "Higher up this time, where the water can't reach." He scanned the area, looking for suitable locations. The rocky outcrop where they had sheltered extended upward, forming a natural plateau about 40 feet above the current ground level. That would work. He was planning the climb when movement caught his eye. Someone was approaching through the forest, moving loudly and making no attempt at stealth. Ben tensed, then recognized the armored figure. Brog had entered the habitat. The reptilian commander stomped toward them, his powered armor hissing and whirring with each step. He held a weapon in each hand, plasma rifles that hummed with barely contained energy. His face, visible through the helmet's transparent shield, was twisted with rage. "Human." Brog's voice boomed through external speakers. "This mockery ends now. You have violated the spirit of the challenge with your tricks and deceptions." Ben set Holly down behind him and stepped forward. "I don't know what you mean. We're just trying to survive, same as any species would." "Lies." Brog raised one weapon, pointing it at Ben. "You have corrupted the spine render, broken its warrior spirit. My people's greatest predator reduced to a pet. This is an insult that demands answer." The spine render lifted its head at the mention of its kind, eyes focusing on Brog. It made a low warning sound but didn't move from its sunny spot. "I didn't corrupt anything," Ben said carefully. He could feel his heart racing but kept his voice steady. "I treated a wound. That's all. You made it weak." Brog took another heavy step forward. "You will pay for this dishonor." Holly peeked around Ben's leg. "Why are you so angry, mister?" "We didn't do anything bad." Brog's eyes focused on the small human child. His weapons shifted slightly, now pointing more directly at her. The offspring, of course. The human weakness. Excessive attachment to underdeveloped young. Everything happened at once. Brog's weapon began to charge, a high-pitched whine building. Ben lunged forward, grabbing Holly and diving to the side. The spine render exploded into motion, closing the distance to Brog in 3 powerful bounds. The hive swarm appeared from nowhere, hundreds of insects dive-bombing the commander's armor. Brog fired, but the spine render crashed into him first, knocking his aim wide. The plasma bolt scorched a tree, leaving a smoking crater in its trunk. Brog tried to bring his second weapon to bear, but the hive swarm found the gaps in his armor, slipping through seams and joints. Their stingers couldn't penetrate the material, but they blocked sensors and covered his helmet, blinding him. The spine render's claws scraped against Brog's armor, searching for weak points. Its jaws clamped down on one arm, teeth grinding against metal. Brog roared, trying to shake off his attackers. Then the crystalline constructs arrived, drawn by the energy discharge from Brog's weapons. They phased through the air, geometric shapes that reflected light in dizzying patterns. One construct latched onto Brog's power pack, beginning to drain its energy. "Stop!" Ben shouted. He was still holding Holly, protecting her, but he could see this was going to end badly. Brog was dangerous, yes, but he was also being overwhelmed. "Everyone stop." The spine render paused, still holding Brog's arm in its jaws. The hive swarm hesitated, hovering in an angry cloud. Even the crystalline constructs slowed their feeding. Ben approached carefully, Holly clinging to him. "Let him go, please." The spine render released Brog's arm and stepped back. The hive swarm pulled away, though they remained close. The crystalline constructs detached from the power pack, drifting away. Brog stood there, armor damaged and covered in dents and scratches. His weapons were still in his hands, but his posture had changed. He looked at Ben, then at the creatures surrounding them, then back at Ben. You called them off," Brog said, confusion clear in his voice. "They attacked to defend you, and you stopped them." "You were going to hurt Holly," Ben said quietly. "They reacted, but I don't want anyone killed over this. Not even you." Brog stared at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his weapons. "I do not understand humans," he said finally. "I came here to prove you were weak. to show that tricks and deception cannot replace true strength. But this, he gestured at the assembled predators. This is not weakness. No, Ben agreed. It's not. The spine render fights for you. The hive swarms protect you. Even the energy feeders respond to your commands. How? Ben shifted Holly to his other hip. She was watching Brog with wide eyes but no longer seemed frightened. I didn't command them. We helped each other. That's all. When you're in trouble, you don't ask if someone is the same species as you. You just help. Brog was silent for a long moment. Then he turned and began walking back toward the forest. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back. I will tell the council, he said. What I have seen here. They should know. Then he left, his armor's servos whining with each step. Ben let out a breath he had been holding. The spine render approached and gently nudged his shoulder with its snout, checking to make sure he was unharmed. The hive swarm landed on nearby branches, their buzzing settling into a calmer rhythm. Is he gone, Daddy? Holly asked. Yeah, sweetheart. He's gone. Good, he was mean. She squirmed to be put down. Can we make the new camp now? I'm hungry. Ben laughed, the tension draining from his body. Yes, we can make camp now. In the observation room, Quillen watched Brog exit the habitat. The reptilian commander's armor was damaged, his weapons drained. But more importantly, his understanding had been shattered. Replay the sequence, Quillen ordered. I want to see exactly how the human stopped the attack. The technician complied, showing the moment again. Ben shouting for them to stop. The predators mid-attack actually listening. Obeying not out of fear or dominance, but out of something else. Something the council was struggling to name. They chose to follow his instructions, one observer noted. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Because he cared about their well-being, another added. He stopped them from harming Brog not to save the commander, but to prevent them from becoming killers. Quillen's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The humans had passed every test. They had survived the predators, survived the storm, and now had survived an armed opponent. But more than that, they had transformed the entire nature of the challenge. This was no longer about survival. It was about community, and the Galactic Council was going to have to decide what to do with a species that could build community in the most hostile environment imaginable. 70 hours into the challenge, Ben sat on the rocky plateau they now called camp, watching the fall sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Holly was napping beside him, exhausted from a day of exploring and playing. Whiskers lay stretched across her legs, purring softly. Around them, their unlikely companions had settled into a comfortable routine. The spine render was down below, hunting. Ben had learned that the creature needed substantial food, and while he had shared their supplies generously, there wasn't enough for something that large. So the predator hunted for itself but always returned to the camp afterward, bringing offerings of whatever it had caught. Ben didn't usually need the raw meat, but he appreciated the gesture. The hive swarm had become less of a swarm and more of a presence. Groups of scouts would leave to hunt, while others maintained watch around the camp. They communicated with each other through patterns of movement and subtle changes in their buzzing frequency. Ben couldn't understand it, but he recognized it as language. The crystalline constructs were the most mysterious. They came and went, phasing in and out of solid matter, always observing. They seemed fascinated by Holly, especially when she laughed or showed emotion. Ben wondered if they fed on emotional energy somehow. It would explain why they kept returning even though they never attacked. Everything was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Ben had been waiting for the challenge to end, for someone to announce that 72 hours were complete. But no announcement came. Instead, something else was building. He could feel it in the way the habitat's lighting had changed, in the way the wind patterns seemed artificial, in the subtle hum that vibrated through the rocks. Whiskers lifted his head, ears swiveling. The cat looked toward the forest, then back at Ben with an expression that clearly said, "Something's coming." Ben stood up carefully, not waking Holly. He walked to the edge of the plateau and looked down. The spine render was returning early from its hunt, moving fast. The hive swarm was gathering, forming up into their tight combat formations. Even the crystalline constructs were appearing, more of them than Ben had seen before. Then he saw why. The forest was moving. Not just trees swaying in wind, but the entire tree line rippling like water. Something massive was displacing the forest itself, pushing through from the other side of the habitat. What now? Ben muttered. The answer came moments later. A creature emerged that made the spine render look small. It stood on 6 legs, each one as thick as a tree trunk. Its body was covered in overlapping plates of natural armor. Its head was all jaw, filled with rows of grinding teeth. And it was angry. This wasn't one of the challenge predators. This was something from the habitat's ecosystem itself. A maintenance creature that kept the vegetation under control. But the storm had damaged something, freed it from its containment area, and now it was loose and confused. It saw the plateau, saw movement, and charged. "Everyone up here now," Ben shouted. The spine render needed no encouragement, scrambling up the rocks with surprising agility. The hive swarm rose into the air, getting altitude. The crystalline constructs phased closer, forming a perimeter. Holly woke up, startled by the noise. "Daddy?" "It's okay, stay with Whiskers." Ben grabbed his pack, looking for anything useful. A rope, a knife, some climbing gear. Nothing that would stop a creature that size. The creature reached the base of the plateau and began climbing. Its claws found purchase in the rock, pulling its massive bulk upward. Each step shook the entire formation. Stones tumbled loose, bouncing down into the ravine below. The spine render roared a challenge, but even it knew this was a fight it couldn't win. The hive swarm dove at the creature's eyes, trying to blind it, but their stingers couldn't penetrate its thick hide. The crystalline constructs tried to drain its energy, but biological creatures had less energy than technology. Nothing was working. Ben looked around desperately. The plateau was 50 feet across, but there was nowhere to retreat. Behind them was a sheer cliff face going up another 100 feet. They were trapped. The creature's head appeared over the edge of the plateau, jaws opening wide. It pulled itself up with one massive heave, its body blocking any escape route. Holly was crying now, terrified by the monster. Whiskers had puffed up to twice his normal size, back arched, hissing at the creature. The spine render positioned itself between the humans and the threat, ready to fight despite impossible odds. Ben's mind raced. They couldn't fight it. They couldn't outrun it. But maybe they didn't need to. This creature wasn't hunting. It was confused, disoriented by the storm and the damage to its habitat. It was scared. "Everyone stand down," Ben shouted. "Don't attack it." The spine render looked at him like he was crazy, but it stopped its threatening posture. The hive swarm pulled back, hovering uncertainly. The crystalline constructs ceased their energy drain. Ben stepped forward, keeping his movement slow and non-threatening. The creature's attention focused on him immediately. Its jaws were close enough that Ben could smell its breath, earthy and damp. "Easy," Ben said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're just scared, aren't you? Everything's changed and you don't know where you belong anymore." The creature rumbled, a sound that came from deep in its chest. Its head lowered slightly, no longer in direct threat posture. Ben kept talking, his voice steady and calm. "I know how that feels. Being somewhere strange, not knowing what's safe. It's frightening. But you're okay. We're not your enemy." He reached into his pack and pulled out one of their last food bars. It wasn't much, barely a mouthful for something that large, but he held it out anyway, an offering. A peace gesture. The creature's nostrils flared, catching the scent. Its eyes, which had been wild and panicked, seemed to focus. One massive claw reached out, surprisingly gentle, and took the food bar. The creature ate it in one bite. They stood there for a long moment, human and creature, facing each other across a distance of just a few feet. Then slowly the creature turned. It climbed back down the plateau, its movements calmer now. At the bottom it looked back once, then lumbered away into the forest. Ben's legs gave out. He sat down hard, shaking with adrenaline. Holly ran to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You were so brave, Daddy." "I was terrified," Ben admitted. But it had worked. Somehow it had worked. The spine render approached and gently head-butted Ben's shoulder, a gesture of approval. The hive swarm landed on his arms and shoulders, their presence comforting rather than threatening. Even the crystalline constructs hovered close, their geometric forms catching the light. In the observation room, absolute silence reigned. Quillen stared at the screens, mandibles frozen mid-click. Around him, every member of the Galactic Council who had gathered to watch the challenge's conclusion stood, motionless. That creature could have killed them all in seconds, someone finally said. He calmed it with words, another added. "Just talking. And a food bar," a third noted. "Don't forget the food bar." Quillen turned to his fellow council members. "I believe we have seen enough. The challenge is complete. The humans have more than proven themselves. Agreed, came the chorus of responses. Someone should tell them they can leave now, an observer suggested. But Quillen was watching the screens, where Ben was setting up camp again while Holly helped the spine render arrange comfortable sleeping spots. I don't think they're in any hurry, he said softly. Look at them. They've made a home here, and he was right. In 70 hours, the humans hadn't just survived. They had built a family out of apex predators, created safety from danger, and transformed an arena of death into a place of community. The Galactic Council was going to have to rewrite their entire understanding of what made a species worthy of membership. All because of one man, one toddler and one very confident cat. The habitat's speakers crackled to life just as Ben was teaching Holly how to skip stones in the refilled stream. Quillen's voice, translated into English, echoed across the artificial wilderness. Captain Ben Wright, the 72-hour challenge period has concluded. You may exit the habitat at your convenience. We have much to discuss. Holly looked up at her father. Do we have to go, Daddy? I like it here with our friends. Ben glanced around at their assembled group. The spine render was dozing in the sun, occasionally opening one eye to check on them. The hive swarm was scattered among the trees, some hunting, others apparently just resting. Whiskers sat on his usual rock, tail wrapped around his paws. Several crystalline constructs hovered nearby, their facets catching the light. Yes, sweetheart. We have to go talk to the people in charge. Ben stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. But something tells me our friends are coming with us. The journey back to the habitat entrance took about an hour. They could have gone faster, but Holly insisted on saying goodbye to various landmarks she had named during their stay. The silly purple mushroom tree received a hug. The rock that looks like a potato got a pat. The stream was promised they would visit again. Behind them, the spine render followed at a respectful distance, clearly reluctant to leave. The hive swarm formed a loose escort, flying in patterns above their heads. The crystalline constructs phased in and out of visibility, orbiting their group like satellites. When they reached the entrance door, it slid open immediately. But instead of the small airlock Ben remembered from entering, this opened into a larger chamber with several dozen alien beings waiting. At the front stood Quillen, his insectoid form somehow managing to look both formal and nervous. Welcome back, Captain Wright, Quillen said. We trust the challenge was educational. That's one word for it, Ben replied. He set Holly down but kept hold of her hand. Whiskers jumped to his shoulder, surveying the crowd with regal indifference. The spine render tried to follow them through the door, but its bulk got stuck in the entrance. It made a distressed sound, pushing harder. Ah, Quillen said. That presents a problem. We did not anticipate extraction issues. Can you make the door bigger? Ben asked. Theoretically, yes, but it would take several hours to. A deep rumbling roar echoed through the chamber. The spine render was not happy about being separated from its humans. It began tearing at the door frame, armored claws screeching against metal. Perhaps we should expedite the process, Quillen said nervously. While technicians worked on expanding the entrance, Ben was escorted to a smaller meeting room. It was clearly designed for humanoid species, with chairs that actually fit human proportions. Holly immediately claimed the biggest chair, swinging her legs happily. Whiskers settled on the table itself, ignoring all protests about proper meeting etiquette. Quillen entered with several other council members, including Brog, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. The reptilian commander's armor had been repaired, but his posture had changed. He no longer carried himself with the same aggressive certainty. Captain Wright, Quillen began formally, then seemed to deflate slightly. May I speak plainly? Please do. We have no idea what we just witnessed over the past 3 days. Our understanding of predator-prey dynamics, of survival instincts, of apex species behavior, all of it has been challenged by your actions. I just did what came naturally, Ben said. That is precisely what concerns us. Quillen's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. What comes naturally to humans appears to be community building on a level we have never encountered. You transformed killers into protectors, rivals into family, chaos into cooperation, all within 72 hours. A crystalline being that looked similar to the constructs chimed in, its voice like musical tones. My people's energy feeders have never bonded with biological entities before. They are drawn to your offspring. They wish to remain near her. This is unprecedented. Holly waved at the crystalline being. Hi, I like your pretty shapes. The being actually seemed flustered, its facets shifting colors rapidly. Brog stepped forward. I came to this council to protest your admission, he said to Ben. I believed humans were weak, that you used tricks and deception rather than true strength. I was wrong. He performed a gesture that might have been a bow. The spine render of my people chose to protect your offspring over its own life. That is not weakness. That is something we have no word for in our language. The word you're looking for is family, Ben said quietly. Family. Brog tested the word. Yes, perhaps that is what we have been missing. The door opened again and more council members filed in. The room was getting crowded. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to see the humans who had survived the impossible challenge. A small furry being from near the back spoke up. We have debated your admission for months. Some said humans were too violent. Others said you were too emotional. Some claimed you would disrupt galactic order. The being paused. Having watched your challenge, we now believe all of those concerns are valid and completely irrelevant. I'm not sure I follow, Ben said. Quillen answered. What my colleague means is that yes, humans are violent when threatened. Yes, you are emotional. Yes, you will absolutely disrupt our established order, but you will do so by making everything better, by building bridges where we saw only walls, by creating family where we only understood hierarchies. So, we passed the challenge? Ben asked. You didn't just pass, Quillen said. You redefined what the challenge was supposed to measure. Holly tugged on Ben's sleeve. Daddy, does that mean we can stay with our friends? There was a commotion at the door. The spine render had been extracted from the entrance and was being led down the corridor by a team of very nervous technicians. It saw Holly through the meeting room's window and made a happy rumbling sound. About that, Quillen said. The spine render belongs to Brog's people. It was on loan for the challenge. It should be returned to their homeworld. Brog shook his head. No, it has chosen its pack. To separate them now would be cruel. Humans have taught me that strength is not just about individual power. It is about the bonds we form. The creature stays with them. The hive swarm wishes to accompany Captain Wright as well, another council member added. They have requested assignment as his personal protection detail. The energy feeders have also petitioned to remain close to the human offspring, the crystalline being added. They find her fascinating. Ben looked around at all the alien faces, watching him expectantly. I'm just a wilderness guide from Colorado. I brought my daughter and my cat to what was supposed to be a simple diplomatic mission. How did this become my life? Whiskers meowed as if to say, you're welcome. Quillen stood up formally. Captain Ben Wright, on behalf of the Galactic Council, we formally invite humanity to join as full members. We ask that you and your family serve as ambassadors, helping us understand the human way of community building. We believe you have much to teach us. I'm not a diplomat, Ben protested. Neither are we, Quillen said. We are just species trying to coexist in a vast galaxy. But you have shown us a better way. A human way. Will you help us? Ben looked at Holly, who was now showing a small hive scout how to play pat-a-cake. The insect seemed genuinely engaged, moving its legs in rhythm. Whiskers watched with tolerant amusement. Through the window, the spine render was settling down, clearly planning to wait for them as long as necessary. Can Whiskers come to the meetings? Ben asked. Quillen's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. I believe we can accommodate one small Earth feline. Then yes. We'll help. The room erupted in sounds that might have been cheering across a dozen species. Treaties were drawn up and signed. Official documents were processed. Formal announcements were prepared for all member worlds. But through it all, Ben just focused on keeping Holly entertained and making sure Whiskers didn't knock over anything important. 6 months later, Ben stood in the Grand Council chamber during a formal session. Holly sat in a special chair next to his, her legs swinging as she colored in a book. Whiskers had claimed the podium itself, of course, grooming himself without concern for diplomatic protocol. The spine render was outside, too large for the chamber but visible through the windows. The hive swarm perched along the walls and crystalline constructs floated near the ceiling. The topic was trade disputes between two species that had been rivals for centuries. Arguments had gone in circles for hours, neither side willing to compromise. Ben had been watching quietly, waiting for a chance to contribute. Finally, during a break, Quillen approached him. You have been very patient, Ambassador Wright. Do you have thoughts on the situation? Maybe, Ben said. Can I try something? Quillen gestured for him to proceed. Ben stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. I've listened to both sides present their cases. You both have valid points. You both have been wronged in the past. You both want justice. But here's what I notice. You're so focused on your differences that you haven't seen what you have in common. We have nothing in common with them, one delegate hissed. Actually, you both love music, Ben said. I've done my research. Your species has a tradition of complex harmonies. Their species has rhythmic drumming ceremonies. You've been neighbors for 1,000 years and never thought to share that? Silence fell across the chamber. Holly looked up from her coloring. Daddy, can they play music together? I don't know, sweetheart. Can they? The two delegates looked at each other, really looked, perhaps for the first time. One of them made a sound, a melodic tone. The other responded with a rhythmic pattern. They continued, building on each other's contributions, creating something new. By the end of the session, the trade disputes were resolved, not through threats or dominance, but through the discovery of shared ground. A cultural exchange program was proposed. Both species left the chamber talking excitedly about collaboration. Quillen approached Ben afterward. You did it again. You found the connection we all missed. I just asked a simple question, Ben said, picking up Holly's scattered crayons. People get so focused on winning that they forget to look for solutions. That is the human gift, Quillen said. You see people where we see opponents. You build bridges where we see walls. You make family where we see strangers. Holly tugged on Quillen's lower leg. Mr. Quillen, I made you a picture. She held up a crayon drawing of stick figures that might have been humans and insects holding hands. Quillen took the picture with surprising gentleness. Thank you, young one. I will treasure this. As they left the council chamber, the spine render fell into step beside them, and the hive swarm formed their usual escort pattern. Whiskers led the way, tail high like he owned the entire station. Crystalline constructs drifted along behind, catching the light. Ben Wright, former wilderness guide, now ambassador to the entire galaxy, carried his daughter through corridors filled with dozens of alien species. And everywhere they went, people stopped to watch, not with fear or suspicion, but with something else, something humans had been spreading since their arrival. Hope. Because if humans could make a family out of apex predators, if they could build community in the most hostile environment imaginable, if they could find connection between ancient enemies, maybe there was hope for everyone. Quillen watched them go, Ben's laugh mixing with Holly's giggles and the rumbling purr of Whiskers. He turned to his aide. When the humans first arrived, I thought they would disrupt everything we had built. I was right. But I never imagined it would be such a good thing. What do we do now? The aide asked. Now? Quillen's mandibles clicked in what had become recognizable as a smile. Now we learn from them. We learn how to be a family instead of just a council. How to build community instead of just alliances. How to love instead of just coexist. That sounds difficult. It does. Quillen looked at the crayon drawing in his hands. But if a human toddler and a cat can teach apex predators to live in peace, perhaps there is hope for the rest of us. And in the corridors of the Galactic Council Station, the sound of laughter echoed. Human laughter, alien laughter, all mixed together, the sound of community being built. One improbable friendship at a time, all because someone brought a toddler and a cat to face apex predators, and discovered that sometimes the greatest strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the ability to connect,